Hello and welcome to the second edition of the Vancouver International Black Film Festival, created by Fabienne Collat Foundation, presented by the Canada Media Fund, and co-presented by Global BC. The Vancouver International Black Film Festival runs from December 16 to 20, online and in person. You can find the complete program and grab your online all-access pass and in-person individual tickets at vancouverblackfilmfest.com. That said, thank you all for joining us today. I'm your host and moderator, Arthur Patazio. I'm a Latin American Emmy-nominated writer-director and have been crafting multi-platform content for over the last 9 years for TV, film, video games, and VR, including original IPs such as Sword Legacy and Angist, and renowned franchises such as Cobra Kai and Mickey Mouse. However, before we begin, we would like to acknowledge we are located on the unceded and occupied lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Vancouver community. Now, on to our topic, on to today's panel. Where do we fit as Black and racialized creatives in the digital entertainment and interactive industries? As most of you know, the video game industry is a multi-billion-dollar market and one of the most successful areas of the entertainment industry. As we discuss representation, which is extremely important, but not only in front and behind the cameras, we also ask, what has been done by the video game industry? Is there enough push for the inclusion of Black and racialized developers, as well as the characters leading the stories we tell? Do diverse developers feel heard and included by the digital entertainment and interactive industries? In essence, what can be done to improve the inclusion and make sure BIPOC professionals feel like part of a bigger and more vocal entity of this conversation? To answer these, and of course, many more questions, we have our amazing panelists. So first of all, a big welcome to Derek N.G. Cummings, CEO of OneSelf World Media. We also have with us today, Tamra Jure, who's a game writer, and Andrew Stewart, who's a gameplay animator at the Coalition. Derek, Tamra, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm very, very excited for our chat. Looking forward to our discussion. But for people who don't know you and who have just joined, let's start with some introductions. So, Derek, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay. Just
Sure,
wanted to hear, tell people who are watching a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, so a little bit about myself. I was a former animation studio director for Kabam Games in Vancouver. Before that, I was at EA for 6 years. Worked on all the sports titles. Last one was NBA Jam. And then just recently moved on to start my own venture for OneSelf World Media to basically developed a codeless software in Unity for creators like ourselves to be onboarded into Unity and develop games on our own or work with, diverse creators.
Fantastic. I personally, I really identify with the part of the codeless of making sure that tools are accessible and democratic so that everyone can use them to create. And yeah, when you're pursuing your own endeavor, there's a lot of passion and motivation in there. So you're ready to face all of the challenges that come with it. Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you, Arthur.
Amazing. Now let's move on to Tamra. Tell us a little bit about your background and what's your story?
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of writers get into the industry a lot of different ways. So my path in the short version, my background is in fiction writing. That's what I got my master's degree in. And I always wanted to go into games. It's something I loved as a kid, like a lot of us. So I only entered the industry in 2020. through what there were a lot of initiatives back then to get more Black people in the industry. So I did internships, freelancing, contract gigs, and work like that. So yeah, I'm primarily like a fantasy writer, and then also doing games. So
Which is amazing to see this bridging of gaps, right? Typically, we think of platforms and media as isolated and single entities. Oh no, I only write for novels. I only write for TV and film. And I think it's such a joy when you're able to look at it and think, this is content and these are stories that need to be told, regardless of the platform, right? So the fact that you did this journey and went from fiction to video games is absolutely fantastic, because you're still writing your own, you're still crafting your own fiction, just using a different way of tell that story. Fantastic.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And now, Andrew, tell us. I'm curious to hear.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm currently a gameplay animator at the Coalition. I started off my career in animation about 15 years ago, working in TV, worked on numerous kids' television shows, but always had in the back of my mind the desire to get into games. I grew up loving the Nintendo and Genesis and all the systems, and fortunately, growing up in Vancouver, I discovered that there was such a huge community of game studios here that you could work at. So I transitioned from TV to games in about 2017, working fortunately on actually a Nintendo game. And that was just kind of like a dream come true. And then from there, I did a bit of cinematic gameplay stuff, and now back into gameplay animation. I'm working on some really big franchises, so it's kind of like the perfect fit for me. I was always a fairly active person and really like to kind of move my body, and they say that animation is for people who are into that sort of stuff. They breathe life into these characters, make them move, make them walk, talk, interact. So yeah, it's really a great fit for me, and really happy to say that the industry seems to be growing in Vancouver. So I'm really fortunate to be part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And really good to hear. It's good to hear that we're in a part of a community, or at least part of this ecosystem where there's room for a lot of growth. And of course, from these transitioning between medias and in industries, as Tamara mentioned as well. So really good to hear that. And I bet that when you mentioned that you're working on a Nintendo game, it's lots of childhood memories just took a lot of power and you feel really good about making that happen. That's amazing. So for our chat today, again, I mentioned this before, but it's really about having a very casual conversation, but a casual conversation focused on a very important and serious topic. And I think it's always interesting for us to start with the understanding of, well, what's the diagnosis of what's the status, what's the situation we're currently going through, and then potentially looking for solutions or just trying to understand what's the potential next step. So what I'm wondering is, for people, especially for people who are watching and not familiar with the struggles or the challenges that come with being Black, Indigenous, a person of color, on a really down-to-earth, personal level, day-to-day experience, I'm just curious to hear if any of you would like to share what have you gone through. And of course, this is just really to be able to offer people a better understanding of what is this experience of being BIPOC, and to feel like you're being racialized in the entertainment industry, or perhaps even if it's not the entertainment industry, previous industries where you worked before. How was that experience of like, I understand this is something that needs to be dealt with? Anyone would like to? Andrew, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I saw this question, I kind of thought to myself, am I really the best person to speak out about this idea? Because I can say that when I look back on my career in animation, I don't really can't point to specific instances where I felt like I was racialized. And to be honest, I had to look up the word to make sure I understood it correctly. I never felt like I was categorized or marginalized or put to the side. But I feel like a part of that is because I've grown up. I spent my entire life in Vancouver, very multicultural friend network and professional network, to the point where like I don't know that I necessarily I might have a bit of a blind spot to being able to notice those sorts of things. So I having realized how I grew up, I'm starting to look at my interactions maybe through more of a detailed lens and see if some of the somewhat negative ways I may feel on a day-to-day basis are related to, the fact that I'm a mixed race person, because I'm always want to give people the benefit of the doubt and don't feel like they're outright trying to deliberately marginalize or act in a way that's, based on how I look. But at the same time, I realize that, that does happen. So yeah, that's kind of like my initial take on that particular question.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Derek, Tamara, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. Like Andrew, like when I read the notes on what we're talking about today, for me, it was kind of like, wow, it's a loaded question. And like, where do you start? I grew up in Winnipeg, so I'm originally from there. So I moved here in 2003. So my experience coming into the gaming industry was kind of, I fell into it. I was an aspired filmmaker, worked at the National Film Board for a number of years, and just thought that was going to be an animation film director, independent person. And culturally, growing up in Winnipeg was quite different, and racism was pretty big there. And I'm neurodiverse, so I'm dyslexic. So I had a really hard time in school and stuff, and found my way. And when I decided to move out to Vancouver, I was it was weird. Like culturally, there was I found that there was a clique in Vancouver. You couldn't get into the industry. It took me like 6 months up to a year. I was depressed. I wanted to go back to Winnipeg because I just couldn't get in. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get into the industry. And everyone would look at my resume and be like, National Film Board, what is that? And I'm like, there's a National Film Board here in Vancouver. Like, it's an independent Canadian, it's worldwide for Canadians. It's huge, but nobody knew it. And they would scoff at it. And it took me a while to get into the industry, to the point where I ended up at Vancouver Film School. And it wasn't until when I was working at Vancouver Film School, I actually took a seat back and worked as a TA. So I worked at a lower position when I was actually a teacher in Vancouver and Winnipeg, and sat under the wings of another instructor who retaught me 3D because I was a 2D animator at the time. And when I got into Bardell, which is the first company in Vancouver that I started, it was pretty profound because years before that, I really wanted to get into Disney Vancouver. And I flew here with my drawings and everything, sat in the lobby, waited for somebody to come out of the door. And it was one of the head show writers, animation director, looked at my stuff, told me my stuff was great, sent me back home, said you should work on your own film, get that out of your system, and then come back. And then years later, we met at I just lost my thought. What's the company I just said? Sorry. Can we start?
Bardell?
Bardell, sorry.
No worries.
We found each other at Bardell, and he recognized me, I recognized him. After the show was done, he wrote me a letter, him and the visual effects director at the time. They said, take this letter and you'll get into any studio you want. How it works in Vancouver, there's a group. It's like a secret underground crew that moves to production. And if you're not on that crew, you're not going to get in. And you weren't on the crew when we were hiring, but you did so well in the exam that animation test that we were giving out, that you blew us away. And that's why we hired you. And from that, my career kind of catapulted from there in Vancouver. And I just kept lucking out. I kept getting picked up by head like the visual effects guy in Vancouver at the time, John Kadecki, picked me up, lived down the street from me, took me on under his wing. I just kept lucking out and getting into the places where I needed to be seen. And also, they were like impressed with what I was doing, but I worked harder than everybody else. I remember there was a guy sitting beside me who was getting way more than I was, just because he worked on a show, in the States, and, I didn't, and it was me and another Asian that was sitting, and we were like, just happened to see his paycheck, his pay stub, and we were like freaking out, because we were like, how is this possible? How come we're doing more work here and stuff? And when I got into EA, it was the same thing. Like, I had to start all over again. And I didn't understand the gaming culture at the time when I got into EA, because obviously it's completely different. I didn't understand titles. I didn't understand director, producer, because I was in film. And to me, producer was like, oh, somebody gets money. You guys get the money, right? And I kept breaking all the rules. And because of that, I got thrown into, like, I was almost blacklisted at EA for my first 2 years at EA. And it was really rough. And again, it was so bad that in my third year, they call it free agent. And I got put to a producer who was actually he was a guy that nobody wanted to work with. And they thought that would be my last, run at EA, that he would be able to assess if I was actually good enough to stay at EA. And it turned out that he was like, you're nothing to what everyone says you are. You're actually better than everyone. Like, you're better than what people are saying. And from that, I became the guy at EA under him, to the point where I got into another team, and the person that I had friction with on the team that I was on rose to the ranks and made his way to find me, to try to get rid of me again. So it's things like that and this is where with Andrew speaking, you don't really realize that these things are happening, because because you are a person of color, you're always constantly heads down trying to work, you're trying to prove yourself, you're trying to make sure that you are better than everybody else, so that you can rise to the ranks. And I didn't realize at the time, and I didn't realize that I was being racialized or even discriminated against. And that was really hard for me. I didn't realize until years later, like until I actually left. I worked on NBA Jam, and I was on a team with a whole bunch of people that nobody liked. Like, we were the team that was destined to fail. They wouldn't even give us a budget to do the game. And it was that's a legendary basketball game. We didn't have a budget, and we were like underdogs, and we flipped the entire process of getting greenlit projects. Everyone, all the VPs, everyone was looking at us being like, what are you guys doing that's different? And it was because we were so small and we were all different. We all came from different walks of life, and we all had different ways of thinking and approaching things. And we just solved so many problems so fast that we stayed at a team of 25 when we launched. And that was my first experience of like, wow, this is how a team should be. This is what good looks like. To when I left and went into the market of mobile and went to a startup, and that startup was the same culture. It was a bunch of people who didn't want to deal with that crap anymore. And I just seemed to get myself into places where I was actually supported. But I feel like since Black Lives Matter, all the pandemic and stuff like that, even the company that I left recently, even though I was one of the founders of that company, I was there for 13 years, and I still was seen down below. I was never at the top. I was never recognized as somebody who's a founder, somebody who built a game that made billions of dollars for the company. I was never recognized ever. And actually I was pushed sideways to the point where I didn't actually realize that was happening to me. And that's where I think it's sad that somebody with that, has worked in the industry, and I had many people come to me and say, hey, you're the only Black person I know who has a title director under their name who's Black in the gaming industry. How is that? And I never thought about that. Never, ever. I never even thought about it. I was just heads down, always working. So it is a very loaded question of why we aren't there, or, how do we fix it? I think from being in the industry for quite some time and being across different, being from film, TV, and games, I think games is it's very close. And I think there's a really big problem there from what I've seen. And even from the last day when I left the company, I took a screenshot of the room that I was in. And I looked around the room. There wasn't one female, and I was the only Black guy there in the studio. And I was being directed by people who actually were not in the industry as long as I have. And that's, to me, is just crazy that I'm like staring at people that I actually kind of had a hand in hiring and stuff, that they were telling me how to build a game. And I'm like, yeah, I helped build the company. So that's where, to me, you really realize that no matter how much work you do, you're just not recognized for it. You don't get the recognition, and it's very sad. And it really, it hurt me for a while, and that's why I kind of left and started my own thing to try to help change that.
Thank you for sharing. It's you pointed out some very impactful examples, and obviously you're speaking about them firsthand because it is the story that you lived through. And the whole point of this conversation is precisely to be able to identify. I think it's so precise when you say the stigma of the underdog, because it feels like you're always working, you're always trying to prove yourself, you're always looking for, and it's what you mentioned, sometimes you wouldn't even realize it because your focus was not on the issues, your focus was on the solution, on making sure that the work you did got the right spotlight, or the work you did got the right acknowledgement. And it is extremely challenging. Thank you so much for sharing that, for sharing your story.
It's really hard. It's still fresh, obviously.
No, I have no doubt. I bet. And I as I was listening, it's sad in the sense that, as you mentioned, there's this huge gap, right? You see these glaring differences, but at the same time, and I guess, of course, this is a talk for us. That's why I mentioned first we have the diagnosis, then we talk about inspiration. There will be room for inspiration, of course, for us to talk about good examples and things that pave the way for a better future. But of course, I think identifying the issue is a very important part of the process.
Absolutely.
And as you mentioned, so it's about the stigma of the underdog. And another thing you mentioned, which I thought was, again, it's something we talk about often, but it's very important when we realize that diversity, the power of diversity that comes precisely when you get together lots of these quote unquote underdogs, these people that are visible minorities, or that when we're like in a situation where we have a lot to share, we have a lot to say, we have a lot to give, either because we have a different cultural background or we come from whatever walks of life we've been through, but because of the way, and we talk about systemic racism, because of the way society is structured and industries are structured. You mentioned the video game industry, of course. It's no surprise that it is pretty much a male-dominated industry, and there are great efforts to change that. But again, it's a process that to break the quote unquote break the wheel, it's not an easy fight, right? It takes time and it is challenging. But again, the fact that we're having this panel and we're having this conversation is already, in my opinion, I think it's an amazing step, and it means that we're moving forward. So first of all, apologies for the loaded question, but I do think it's that we're here to talk about what is impacting us, about what needs to be discussed. So thank you so much, Derek.
Thank you.
Tamara, would you like to add? I mean, even if it's just to talk about your own story, or just the process, the journey that you went through, and how you got to where you were, and if you noticed that at any point it was challenging. It was more challenging than it is for a lot of other people.
Yeah, I honestly do not know how I would have broken into the industry if I didn't graduate at the right. It feels bad saying at the right time, because it was like the worst time. But I graduated from my MFA program in spring of 2020. The pandemic was setting in, interrupted my final semester. And then we went into the summer. All of the protests, the renewed awareness of like all industries taking account of like where they were with how are we treating Black applicants, Black employees. Like I said, I'm also a fiction writer, so I was seeing the conversation on like the publishing side too, as well as in games. Because I'd looked at positions before, because I was like, graduation is coming up, and I just didn't see a lot of opportunities, especially being a writer in the games industry. It's super competitive. So a lot of positions that you see posted are for lead positions. There's not a lot of entry-level positions, not a lot of junior positions for writers in the first place. And then on top of that, you add in, being Black, being queer, being neurodivergent, all of those things. And so it just felt like there was so much stacked against me, I guess, and not having the experience that people expected, like Derek mentioned, coming from like a prose background, poetry and stuff like that, and trying to get people to see how I could transfer those skills to games was very difficult. And I say that I don't think I would have broken in if I weren't applying in 2020, because the thing that I got my foot in the door was an internship that was specifically posted by a small and indie studio saying, we want to have we're opening this internship entry-level for an entry-level writer. We want to open opportunities to Black people specifically. There were 1,000 likes on that tweet, hundreds of retweets, and I was like, so you mean hundreds of us are going for one position? And it really felt like, at least in my experience, that it was only smaller studios that were doing this, studios that already didn't have a lot of resources. I feel like bigger studios could have done more, but it was really, a lot of the opportunities I've had have been smaller studios, where I feel like people can really like mobilize more quickly and be like, we want to change something, we want to hire it. In this way, we want to change our process. And so I was, I think like Derek said, just really overwhelmed, really depressed. I was like, I don't know how to start this. And so I applied to that internship. They only required, I think, a short writing sample, like 500 words worth of anything. It could be literally anything. It could be a script. It could be prose, anything. And then I think maybe a short cover letter. And that was the least intense games application I'd ever seen, ever. And so I feel like when we talk about equity, when we talk about wanting marginalized people in this space, we need to also look at what hurdles are we asking them to jump through, because they didn't, like the writing test, which is super. I've seen so many Twitter threads on the writing test, all the free labor that these AAA companies ask from marginalized folks who have, like maybe caregiving, full-time job, struggling to make ends meet, and then you want free labor from us on top of that. But this company was like, send us something you already have. Don't take a lot of time on it. and they got hundreds of applications, and there was only one position. And I guess, yeah, I wish that there was an awareness that you can, like, and they made a call. I did the work. They were happy with my work. They were like, this is excellent. And they didn't put me through this gauntlet of 5 million interviews, you know. And also just thinking about intersections again, like being, like, having any kind of anxiety disorder, being you know, neurodivergent, like those are also, that's like an invisible you know, like barrier to you know, like you're being evaluated in all these different ways, and they're asking you to fit this very small idea of what is like a good candidate. And it's like, maybe we can expand our idea of who a good candidate, you know, just like looks like, you know. And so I guess just from my, you know, like short 2 years of experience in the industry, I just feel like the smaller studios have taken the most chance on me. And I feel like the feedback I get consistently, which I think is something that a lot of like entry level junior people struggle with, is like, your work is amazing. It's like excellent even. But for some reason we can't bring you on full time. It's like a thing that I feel like a lot of people hear. And so I've seen so many marginalized people get stuck freelancing. They don't have the protections of, you know, having like a studio to call home. And I think that's also something that keeps marginalized people out, is just that I think companies are looking for, I don't know, something that we're not. It feels like a lot of the time, and it's very disheartening to keep trying, keep hearing that you're doing excellent work. But then, you know, seeing, like Derek said, seeing other people, you know, hired on full time, hired on before you, like when you started at the same time. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing. It's interesting because, I mean, the barrier of entry exists in all sorts of industries, right? As Derek mentioned, oh, you want to get this maybe this position on this show or this animation. You mentioned, for example, the writers struggle, especially in the game industry, because typically, how many writers do you have on board for a game? It's 1, 2. You know, it's a very limited spots. But it's impressive to think that you already have these natural barriers, but then if you don't come from these specific backgrounds, or if you don't come, because at the end of the day, going back to your story, Derek, it's all about also establishing connections, right? Who are you connected with, and how because it makes a difference on how people look at your work, and how they know your story, and how they know what you've been through, or the quality of your work. And it almost feels like you're looking for that opportunity to get that specific spotlight. And your work might be amazing, but depending on the case, we lack that opportunity to be able to say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Take a look at it. It's very challenging. So it's very, very noticeable that there are the natural barriers. And then again, there are even more complicated and harder to face barriers when we talk about visible minorities and these issues that are faced, because you don't get you saw, for example, only one spot, right, for thousands of people applying. And I think it's thankfully, at least if we're talking about independent development, we see companies that even if they aren't the big blockbuster or AAA companies, at the very least, they're making room, or they're trying to make room for new creatives that are able to bring, again, the diversity and this new perspective. And then by putting out these products and these games and these works, that's how the awareness spreads. But again, it's not the sort of opportunity that comes by every day. And I totally understand the challenge, the struggle of looking for that. You try, and out of like 1,000 opportunities, there's one that either works or that someone just took more time to talk with you or to see what else could be developed from that opportunity. That said, you mentioned this opportunity, which was one that, although it was one, it did allow this this breakthrough, right? So I'm curious to hear as well, moving on to now that we understand the challenges that are taking place, what are good examples of when we think of different initiatives that not necessarily just companies have taken, but when we see different initiatives that even people have taken in terms of how can we make the industry more inclusive? How can we make sure that professionals who have a lot of quality and a lot of experience to share, that they get that spotlight that they deserve? Internships, for example, that's a great example, because you see the case of like, you want to make sure that people, they get the chance to come in, and that they should grow as well along with the company, that they should grow along with other people. It's very convenient to expect people to come in at a senior level, right, at a leadership level. But when you're helping people grow together, that's when we're able to expand that. Are there any interesting examples or even initiatives that you've noticed that you thought, wow, this is something that I would like to see more of? And this goes for all three of you, whoever would like to share, if anything comes to mind.
I haven't really seen initiatives, because I was always in the hiring position. So I think one of the things that what I tried to do was, I always had it in my head, if I got to a place where I had the power to hire somebody, I would make sure that I make that strong connection. And especially in the animation community, because animators are really not, they're always told what to do. And then everyone wants to be an animator. And so they always get these feedbacks. And then we have to, decompress the feedback and figure out how to make everyone happy. And I think, what I've done over the years is we developed a animation test. And that animation test was to get them to figure out how these people, what their aptitude is like, and what they're going to try and do. And I would sit down with them personally. Like, I would give them the tests, and they would call me. I'd give them my personal number. They would call me, and I'd be like, yep, let's sit down and I'll go through the test with you. And I would get to know that candidate, like, on a personal level. And we would work through the test together, and I'd give them feedback. And I started noticing that the difference in the quality of work that was coming out of the candidates. And they were like, am I allowed to use if I don't get a job here, am I allowed to use this? I'm like, of course you can, because I'm helping you so that you can get a job somewhere else if we can't find room for you. But we were always, I was always at the mindset of like trying to find room in the studio on my teams to work with, because I believed if they can come to the studio and have that type of connection, they will go out into the world, into the industry, and demand from another studio that type of connection. And the word would get out that, there's a guy in this studio who actually sat down with me and went through my test. I didn't get a generic letter. I didn't get it was literally, they sat down, they went through my test. I even got to meet the rest of the team. It felt like I was on the team. So I think that's one of the things that I tried to do. And then all my animators, all the lead animators, we all tried to do the same. We came together as a group, and we tried to make this a really cool experience for candidates that were coming in, so that they can feel like they were part of the company, even because we knew we were asking for time that they didn't have. So we're like, if we're going to ask for this time, you're going to spend a week or two with us, and we're going to make you feel like what it's like to be in the studio. And then you can make your choice if you actually want to come here and work with us, because now you know what it's like. You know what we do. We know what the quality is. We know you know, what type of techniques we use. So we give that back to them. And I think it's for me, I've seen it pay back tenfold. Like those people have come. I've met so many animators all over the world who have contacted me just out of the woodwork, and especially through pandemic, Black Lives Matters, and all that. That I'm like, where have you been? Where have you been hiding? You know, and I think for me, I think studios need to do that, and I think that's something that isn't quite there yet. That I would like to see more of. You know, like Tamara was saying, it's like you got all these applicants applying for one position. You know, and if you are applying for that one position, make it at least meaningful for them so that they can actually walk away and be like, wow, you know, even though it's one position, it's like, wow, I got so much information. I can go on and move somewhere else and probably get that next job, right? That is, you know, it's just as competitive, but maybe there's more positions, but you're the only person that is, you know, color. And I think that's something that I think more studios need to try and do. And I think more people need to step up and try and do that as much as they can.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about, of course, if you have this opportunity, you make this opportunity to spend time and develop the confidence, right? Because I think it's part of it is having the confidence, or at least getting this encouragement to face the industry, face the market when you know that the odds are against you. So it's about having that motivation of like, yeah, even if about the work that they developed, as you mentioned, even if they didn't get hired, that's your work. You've developed it. You've crafted this, and this shows the quality of what you can do.
Yeah.
And that means you should be able to take it to anyone else.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Because all the people that I've met throughout my career, it's the reason why I'm actually talking to you today about my experience. It's like a handful of people in my career that actually put their necks out and said, "No, we're gonna take this guy. We're gonna. I think he can. I think this guy can do it." And if they didn't take that risk on me, I never would have lasted in the game industry for sure. Like, if I didn't have those two people at EA at the time when I was going through my career, I would have been blacklisted from the game industry, hands down. That's how much power these people had. I would have been blacklisted. I would have had to go back I would have to start my whole career all over again. And it took two people to say, no, this guy he's really good, you know? And I remembered that, and I took that experience, and I'm like, if I ever get into power, I'm going to do what these two people did, because holy, like, I almost got crushed. You know, and that's something that is like, I think there's a lot of people who go through my experience, Tamara's experience, Andrew's. I think there's a lot of people that go through this experience and they don't realize it. And they think it's them. It's not the organization that they're at. They just don't realize it. And the industry is kind of like that too. They kind of make you feel like it's your problem. It's your fault that you're not performing. And I think that's something, you know, they have to correct that. And HR is another one that needs to be, you know, HR is for the organization. It's not for you. And that's something that's I've experienced that firsthand, of talking to HR and twice in my career, and they turned against me and ended up got signed in, like, you know, put on a performance review type thing, you know? So it's something that's another thing that kind of has to change in the organizations as well, as a positive thing, because HR should be for the people, not for the company. I don't know how they would do that, but that's something that's got I've worked with a lot of HR partners, and they too feel the same. Like, they try, they want to, but you can tell their hands are tied. Like, they can't quite move, like they can't protect you the way that they would like to.
Got it. Yeah, it's the more I think about it, it's what I wonder is exactly as you mentioned, it's about how do we bring these values and present them to the company, as in like it's otherwise it's just in the company's interests and not in the interests of the people who are there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I saw a very inspiring. It was through. It was during the pandemic and through Black Lives Matter. It was from Sony, actually. It was all the like director, like the guy who worked on, who was the director of Spider-Man Morales and stuff. And they were talking about one of the panelists, the woman. She was a writer, and she said, "This is very surreal right now because realistically, we are creative." We are creative people, and here we are talking about how we should help one another get into the industry. But really, we all are creative. We all think creative. You're creative. There's no color. There should be no division between us. We are all creative. And it's odd that there are people who are creative that don't fit the model because of our skin or neurodiverse of who we are. It's bizarre because how did that happen? It's like, and I remember seeing, I was like, whoa, actually you're right. Like, if all places, this should be the most free, but it's not.
Yeah, and that actually leads me to what I'm wondering, which is we're talking about creativity, right? And I want to hear, I don't know, Andrew, if you have an experience to share, but I wanted to hear in terms of creativity, these opportunities where we as creators are developing something or crafting something, either all the way from writing to animating, directing, whatever it is, but a moment of where you're like proud, like I am proud of something that I've created, not only because either you put a lot of work into it, but also because it shines as an example of your unique voice, right? We're talking about diversity. And I think it's so, so nice when we are able to bring our own voice into whatever we're crafting. And I would like to hear if any of you have any specific examples of like, wow, I was working on this project, or I was writing the script, or I was involved with this, no matter the type of experience, but I was working on it. And at that moment, I thought, this is so cool because I am getting the opportunity to express myself and express my unique background.
Yeah, I think for me, I think back to one of the highlights of my career working at a place that Derek worked as well, Bardell. Spent a lot of my career there, and working on Ninja Turtles was something that kind of resonated with me just because each one of them is so unique, and I felt that kind of individuality was something that kind of spoke to me because I'm of mixed background. There's times where I haven't felt like I fit into either a camp of white people or Black people. So just being able to see these characters that were so different and had this camaraderie amongst themselves, in a sense, sort of resonated with me. Also, the physical aspect of they're martial artists. I felt that spoke to my own background, interest in martial arts and that sort of stuff. So in terms of like being able to actually connect with a character on screen that I was working on, that really spoke to me in that sense. And then just personality wise, I mean, each of them is so unique from one to the other. I felt that I was able to resonate mostly with Michelangelo being kind of a bit of a goofy guy. I was able to take my own experiences of being kind of like the class clown, the jokester. That was really something that I was able to breathe into that particular character. And then I look at other elements of my career where, working for some of the bigger companies, they kind of want you just to stay in your lane and do things that are not really stepping outside the boundaries that they've established. And that's fair enough. But I feel that the opportunities you have where you can stretch your legs and breathe your own personal experience into a character, if you're given that freedom, are the ones that make you realize why you got into the industry in the first place. So yeah, I don't know that any of these examples are necessarily relating to race per se, but I feel like just the fact that I was able to take my life experience and in a sense, breathe it into the characters I was animating with my work at Bardell, that there is a certain element of me and my ethnic background that was in there. I don't know how exactly to quantify it much more than that, but I think what I'm really trying to distill my point down to is when we as creators are given opportunities to express our creativity and are not constrained, I think that's where we really grow the most. And I just want to kind of touch on something that Derek said. I really feel that it's great to see a person of color in a senior position, in a lead position, dealing with hiring, and those moments where someone like Derek is able to encourage a young person of color to and give really strong feedback. It's going to resonate more because that individual may see themselves in Derek's position down the road. Whereas if it came from somebody who didn't look like them, they may not really pursue the career that they've chosen. So I really think that's great to see someone in a higher position doing that sort of good work. I think those moments really count for a lot. They're super valuable, and I didn't necessarily have them myself, but I think that if I had them, being able to have almost like a mentor that I saw myself, that I saw as a representation of myself, who knows what would have happened. I mean, I don't have any regrets of how things have worked out, but I can see the younger generation really benefiting from being able to have somebody encourage them who looks like them.
That's so true, and it's very interesting because we hear in the industry in general, we hear lots of people saying, "Oh, find a mentor, right? Someone that can guide you, someone that can help pave the way, or someone that has more experience and is willing to share that experience." But of course, what mentor are you going to be in touch with? Makes a huge difference. Obviously, is it someone that you resonate with? Is it someone that shares the same values? Is it someone that understands the struggle you've been through? So, yeah, very well said. Very well said, Andrew. Tamara, would you like to share if there is anything in your work or any moment where you were proud or happy about something that you were working on, or even if you were having a conversation perhaps with coworkers and maybe it was something you said, but that you really thought, yeah, this is, I'm bringing this to the table and I'm happy about it. This is who I am. This is my voice.
Yeah, a couple different examples come to mind, and I think like Andrew, it's not always I guess something that is very specifically tied to race or any of my identities at all. I feel like as a writer, which is something that I've seen in publishing, people either expect you to write a Black story. We have hired you because we want a Black story, or they are nervous about hiring you because they're like, what if you write too Black of a story? So it's usually one of the other. Either they're like, why won't you perform Blackness for me in this narrative, or we want you to be normal, by which we mean fit the and so actually when I did the traineeship with Fail Better Games on Fall in London, they were like, we need a new story arc. It's your playground. What interests you? What do you want to write about? And I was looking through the lore, and I was like, is it okay if I write about the demons? And they were like, yeah, the players, they love the demons. That's one of their favorite factions, and there's all these mysteries. And I'm a goth kid, so I was like, yeah, anyone gives me an opportunity to write about demons. And then after the traineeship was over, one of the writers got in touch with me and was like, that went over super well with the player base, and they were like, more please, can we have more demon content? And so that was I think my very first experience in games where someone was like, you know what, we want you to pitch something, we want to hear what you have to say, like we trust you to do this well and that the players will like it. And then I got the feedback that it went over well, and that was really rewarding. Yeah.
Fantastic. Congratulations. Thank you for sharing, because I think it goes a long way just to show that you were writing about something that was interesting to you, something you were excited about. You pitched it, right? You could have picked anything and you picked that. So you had the motivation to go for that. And again, it makes a huge difference when it's a story that you're telling that comes from your own volition, and it's something that your eyes glimmer when you think about the topic, So it's really, really nice to hear. And again, I also think the examples that both of you mentioned, Andrew and you, Tamara, it goes also to show that we are diverse, not only physically, externally, but internally. We are a combination of all of the influences and all of the, not only the culture, but our life experiences, our journeys, and the situations we go through, good and bad. So of course, when you're going to pick a topic of your interest, it's not necessarily connected to specifically the topic of race, because we are many things, including race, but that really ties back to what motivates us and what drives us. So those are really, really, really nice examples and good to hear. Derek, would you like to share any particular case? Anything comes to mind?
Oh yeah, and I share it all the time. I think I share it too much, actually, but here it goes again. NBA Jam, like that. That's probably like the highlight of my career. And I think because, growing up in Winnipeg, I didn't have a console at home or anything like that. It was in that era too. It was only Atari, but I was in the arcades a lot, and I played a lot of NBA Jam. So when I got the opportunity to remake NBA Jam, that was it couldn't have been a better time. And I was given the playground. Like, I got on that team, and I remember we had a Black Friday because we almost lost the project because we pitched it and the executives didn't like it. They thought it was wrong for them. And the art director leaned over to me and he said, "You worked in film, right?" And I'm like, "Yep." And he's like, what can you do with this?" And I'm like, "Let me take it home for the weekend." And I did a whole bunch of compositing, and because we were working on the Wii and there wasn't enough disk space to actually model the heads in 3D. And I made them into cards. And I was like, EA's got like all the rights to Sports Illustrator. I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if we actually took the actual heads of them dunking and stuff? And I brought it back Monday morning, and Peter Moore came right down from his office, leaned over my desk, and he was like, "Can you guys make that? Can you make it look like that on the Wii?" And my face, I must have had such a big smile on my face. I was like, "Oh my God, we're gonna make Grimpy a Jam!" Like that was like, it was the best day of my life. It's always been the best day of my life. And meeting the creator of NBA Jam and him coming in and sitting right beside me and telling me his story of him and his friends carting those big arcade machines in the back of their truck in LA, going up to trying to sell this idea. Like, you can't get any, like, I was like, I want to leave EA after this game, because there's nothing, there is absolutely nothing that could top this experience right now. And I worked with the most talented engineers and producers, and yeah, that framed up what good looked like to me. Like, that was like I couldn't have left EA on a better positive note of everything that I've taken from there. It cleared my head. It cleared my soul. I was able to see clearly. And I think that was the best thing that could have happened to me. And I'll always look back on that. And yeah, that is the moment for me. That is like That's the moment. So I don't know if it's like a real like Black thing or not, but it was more, you know, I mean, every Black person played NBA Jam, obviously. But that to me that was the thing. It was like, for me, it was like a Winnipeg kid. That was better than going to working at Disney, Pixar, any of those companies. That was the thing for me. So yeah.
Well, and you left your mark, right? Like that was, it was your pitch, and it made it in. And now you're telling this story. So obviously you look back and you think, ha, NBA, that's me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Now I'm wanted to ask all of you, we talked about like having mentors, and this is the part where so we talked a little bit about what's the scenario like, what's the ecosystem, what are the struggles and challenges that are faced, also highlights or inspirational moments, etc. But when it comes to, and of course, Derek, you did this in the stories that you told, like you already went through this process. But then again, we're all here gathered, and I wanted to know if each of you had the opportunity to be this mentor to someone who's trying to break into the industry, to someone who just really needs or is looking for counsel. Really, it's how do they do this? I think I wanted to hear from you. What is the advice? What is the mentor's advice that you have, either to someone who's trying to break in, or even your, I don't know, 10 years ago, yourself 10 years ago? What would you say to yourself 10 years ago when you were contemplating getting to where you are? Andrew, want to give it a shot?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm talking about animation, art positions, there's definitely a standard, a professional standard, a quality standard that you have to meet to get a job. But I don't think your skill as an artist is the only thing that's important in getting hired. It's your unique view on life. I think you should use that unique perspective to inform your work, to get inspiration for your work. So when you're putting together a demo reel, yeah, it's good to do the standard, weight bearing exercises, walks, runs, lip sync, that sort of stuff is good, but you want to put your own unique spin on it. So if that is something that comes from your racial background, that's great. If it comes from your interest, that's great. If it comes from wherever, your family, that's great too. I think if you combine all those things together to inform your work, you're going to stand out from the crowd. And if you can combine that with a strong understanding of animation fundamentals, you're going to really just, you're really going to go places. So I think for me, like if I was to tell my young 20-something-year-old self, I'm getting into the industry, how best to sell yourself to a studio, I think don't try to just do what everyone else is doing, because I've always been somebody who's very, I'm easily influenced, and I still am that way. It's something I struggle with, but I'm learning to realize that you're not valuable to a company just because you can do what they want. You're also valuable because you offer a unique perspective that they don't have yet. So run with that, sell that, find out what it is and hone it, sharpen it to a fine point, and be confident in your perspective and how you can harness it to benefit wherever you're working, because you are valuable. We're all valuable in our own unique way, and the sooner we can figure out how we offer that value in the best way, and I think the more success we're going to have professionally and just in life in general. So I hope that makes sense.
Amazing. Yes, of course it does. Of course it does. I think it reminds me of what Tamara said about writing about demons. It's about like, what are you going to go for? What is the, how can you express yourself, and how can you make sure that you're sharing something that is unique to what you love and to how you want to express that to the rest of the world. Speaking of demons, Tamra, is if you were to mentor your 10-year-old, or not even, sorry, you're not your 10-year-old, but 10 years ago, what would you say? What would you share?
Wow, okay. I feel like because I'm the industry newbie, like 10 years ago, like I'm thinking like I just finished high school, you know? I was looking towards like undergrad and then, yeah, like not even knowing what I was going to do for work, what was possible. I feel like I had, it felt like a very impossible, far-fetched dream, you know? And I think, gosh, yeah, I kind of like looking back, I feel like my 18-year-old self would just be mind blown at where I am right now. So I think just like doing, I don't know, like doing the scary thing. I don't know. I feel like this is like cliche follow your heart advice. But I feel like I don't have so much like concrete mentorship advice yet. I feel like so much of what I feel like a lot of what I have to like give at this point is like this like emotional thing of like it, you know, like all of the struggle it took to get here. But like I also can't imagine doing anything different. And I feel like so creatively fulfilled where I'm at. And so I think just like taking the chances, doing the hard thing that seems kind of impossible, so that yeah, you're not looking back and being like, I mean, what would have happened if I'd applied to that thing that I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get because it had 1,000 likes on Twitter, you know? Like yeah, I guess it's the shoot your shot advice.
Awesome. Derek, what else? What would you say? I mean, you've based on what you said, you've already mentored quite a few people. But yeah,
I always just, it really just, it's like Andrew, you know, when you're an animator, you kind of fall into the mentorship if you're a lead or you end up becoming a director and stuff like that. And I think I just kind of fell into the role of being a mentor. Like people would always tell me, you're my mentor. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I think, you know, to make it short, I saw a quote one time and I keep it in my phone all the time. And I now tell, you know, the people that say that I'm their mentor is, if you can look up, you can get up. And that to me has always, when I saw that, I'm like, I woke up, it pinged on LinkedIn and I was lying on my back and I opened my eyes and I'm like, oh my God, that is perfect. And I think it's true. If you can, when you open your eyes and you're looking up, then you can get up. And I always tell them, if you can do that, if you can get up every day, and if you're up, then your day's already started. So, you know, you flow with it and you go with it. You remember it and you log it. So
head up high, looking up high, just confident that you're going to be able to pull it through.
Yeah. And the other, one more thing that I always tell specifically to animators is the best thing, and this is also when candidates actually apply. I always tell them that, you know, to be a really good animator, it took me years to learn this, but is to actually listen to the feedback, because you can actually start understanding like personal feedback, which is, you know, I don't like something versus there's something wrong and I don't know why. And when you hear there's something about this and I don't know why, that's where you steer the room to the person who is actually going, there's something here. When it's somebody telling you something of, I don't like this, it should be like this, that's when you ignore the feedback, because it's a personal feedback. And, you know, one of the questions I always got asked is like, yeah, but that person's got a direct, and I'm like, that's not direct feedback. because creative is subjective. So nobody's right. So you must look at it like that. Nobody is right. It's just a subjective thing. So when somebody's telling you something that they don't like something and it's hard and they tell you to change it, it's kind of like you kind of have to ignore that and go with the rest of the room, because the rest of the room, if everyone's being subjective and they're kind of just throwing things out there and it's like, maybe try this or try that, that's kind of the one, that's the best feedback that you're going to get, because that's when you know it's like everyone is actually working together. So that's what I would tell myself, because it took me a lot of years to
but it is not easy, right?
I used to get really angry. I'd be like, like, what? I spent hours on that.
We're almost at time, so I'd like to ask all three of you if people want to stay in touch, if people want to learn more about your work, Tamra, more about your work, Derek, and yours, Andrew. How do they get to see more of what you're creating, and how do they reach out to you? Who knows? Again, you might even get some mentees looking for your help. Andrew, want to go first?
Okay. Sorry, Tamra. I'm on LinkedIn, Andrew Stewart. Pretty easy to find. And yeah, if you want to send me a message, I'm happy to respond. And yeah, that would be the best way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Tamra?
Yeah, I think I am Tamara Jure most places. I'm Tamara Jure on Twitter. My website is just my name, tamarajure.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, I think under the same name. Yeah.
Sounds good. And Derek?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out.
Nice.
You can also email me too directly. It's my full name.com. So at gmail.com. So, but I would love to stay in touch with everyone here.
No, for sure. I'm super curious and very much looking forward. We talked about what you've done in the past, but I'm very much looking forward to what you're going to do in the coming months and years. Okay, then thank you so much, Derek, Tamra, Andrew. Thank you so much to the Vancouver International Black Film Festival for putting this together, for creating this opportunity for us to talk about all of the struggles, but also the inspiration and the hope that we can bring to this scenario. How can we help, and how can we also pave a better future when it comes to discussing the role of minorities in the video game industry? So thank you so much. And this is it. Very happy that we got the chance to have this chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.